uncomfortable. The grapes are, but they're good.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to call to order the meeting of the University of Minnesota's Board of Regents on this 8th day of February 2019. And our first item of business is minutes, and that's an action item, and I'd entertain a motion to approve those, amend those, edit those, or whatever the board sees fit.
So moved.
Second.
Any edits or changes to the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of approving those? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very good. That takes us quickly into President Kaler's report.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Mr. Chair, members of the Board of Regents, it's our first meeting of the new year, and despite the cold and the ice and the snow, we've all made it here this morning. New Year is a time for both reflection and planful action, and that's what I intend to share with you this morning. In January, I addressed members of the Minnesota Legislature and introduced them to the University of Minnesota's pragmatic, reasonable, and forward-looking legislative request. Our partnership with the legislature is, of course, essential to achieving our great university's mission in teaching, learning, research, and outreach. And I appreciate any opportunity to show and tell the legislature about our role as the state's only land-grant and public research university, because we are powering Minnesota's economy today and building the economy of the future. More importantly, legislators are hearing directly from members of the University of Minnesota community. They're hearing about the transformative impact of the U of M on students like Chidiogo Okawa, whose experience at UMR is preparing her for a rewarding career in health sciences. They've heard from Megan Weber from the Invasive Species Program at the University of Minnesota Extension. She works with Minnesota volunteers to prevent invasive species from spreading, keeping our lakes safe, and for us, and for generations to come. The University of Minnesota's mission and outreach and public service is indeed for all of us. Finally, legislators have heard from university community members engaged in research and discovery, including Dr. Marie Manor, a recent PhD graduate in the U of M Twin Cities College of Science and Engineering, who recently joined the 3M company, and Professor Jed Ellison of CEHD and the medical school. They work across boundaries, combining artificial intelligence and robotics with early childhood development. The result is they're developing research using robots to help diagnose autism. Minnesota has a higher autism rate than the U.S. average, as you probably know. The average is 1 in 59, but in Minnesota it's 1 in 42 children will be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And the longer it takes to diagnose autism, the more challenging it can be for the children to thrive. The University of Minnesota's research directly impacts the lives of Minnesotans across the entire state, and that's just one example of the university's research innovation across traditional boundaries. And you'll hear more about our exceptional research enterprise during Vice President for Research Chris Kramer's presentation today. Our legislative request has the mission and vision of the university as its foundation, tied to the long-term strategic plans for our campuses. In parallel, we will be seeking your approval of a modest inflationary increase in the University of Minnesota's Twin Cities resident tuition. Facilitating our core mission requires investments in our people and investments in our infrastructure. That's why this legislative request is focused only on the operational essentials that allow us to deliver on our mission. Specifically, we are asking for a modest increase in state support for our biennial budget. This will help fund core operations and address our highest priority needs. We're also asking lawmakers to invest in our infrastructure by providing funds for rebuilding, renovating, or modernizing existing facilities across the university system. During the coming months, I'm looking forward to working with all of you to make the case for the University of Minnesota to our legislatures. Now it's my pleasure to share some of the fun things happening around the University of Minnesota system. Morris has 5 finalists for Fulbright scholarships, which attest to the value of a Morris education on the global stage. Dr. Temple Grandin, the acclaimed autism spokesperson and professor of animal science, spoke at the University of Minnesota Crookston in January and spent the next day with community members and students. University of Minnesota Duluth held a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Heikkila Chemistry and Advanced Material Science Building. Known as HCAMS, the building has state-of-the-art technologies and equipment to promote hands-on learning. We're grateful to the generosity of the Minnesota Legislature and the Heikkila family, as well as the Robert Carlson family, among many others who make this achievement possible. And I'm proud to share that the building was finished ahead of schedule and under budget. We like that. So special thanks to Chancellor Lynn Black, Executive Vice Chancellor Fernando Delgado, Senior Vice President Brian Burnett, and UMF CEO Kathy Schmidlkoffer and their staff for seeing this through. Go for Athletics, very wisely, brought the axe to the Capitol, where it was a huge hit. And the Twin Cities campus commemorated the 50-year anniversary of the Morrill Hall takeover. Student activism sparked by the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on April the 4th, 1968, culminated in a 24-hour sit-in Morrill Hall in 1969, January. The Morrill Hall takeover resulted in the establishment of the Department of Afro-American Studies in 1969, which was one of the first in the nation, and it later became the African American and African Studies Department. The demonstration also spurred the creation of scholarships and programs for Black students. 50 years on, we still have work to do, but I believe we are heading in the right direction. Before I conclude, I want to provide an update on the work of the university's task force on building names and institutional history and put their remarkable work into context. The task force, charged by Executive Vice President Provost Hanson and myself in early October, is nearing completion of its 120-page report. Provost Hanson and I expect to receive the report and begin reviewing it next week. The report is comprised of original research, examining and assessing many primary sources, including from the university's archives. The work entailed a comprehensive evaluation of a period in the university's history in which there is much to not be proud of. We know of no other institution that has taken on the very large task of assessing the legacy and context of 4 individuals at one time. The pace of the task force work is, believe it or not, swift in academic terms. As an example, Yale University graduate students first identified concerns with John C. Calhoun's namings in 2002. It took the university until 2017 to identify recommendations. This task force academic rigor is consistent with the university's responsibilities as a top Tier 1 R1 university. Provost Hanson and I are deeply grateful to task force co-chairs CLA Dean John Coleman and Professor Susanna Blumenthal and 9 other task force members. We're thankful for the scholars who facilitated a campus divided. They raised the need to consider these issues, and to the many, many scholars, students, and staff who have dedicated time and attention to bringing the full histories to light. Every day as we look around this campus, we see the proximity of the past. As a paraphrase, it's not even that past. Our objective with this report is to ensure we have a complete picture of our past. I look forward to inviting the task force co-chairs to present their report, and I look forward to presenting my recommendations for your review and discussion at the March board meeting. And with that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my report.
Thank you, President Kaler. I'm going to keep my report relatively brief today and digress from my habit of pulling our priorities from last year up and highlighting those today and highlight a couple of other things that are more contemporaneous right now. First of all, the legislative session is underway, and President Kaler just highlighted several elements of that, but the senior leaders of this university and a range of university officials and many members of this board are over at the Capitol and testifying, lobbying in support of our biennial capital and our budget requests, and advocacy is certainly important and critical in that building and at this time. Secondly, and a little more sadly, quite a bit more sadly, we're saying goodbye this month to one of our colleagues. And Regent Cohen, on behalf of this board, we want to say thank you for your dedicated service to this institution for a dozen years. Not only did you serve 4 of those years in leadership, you had a 2-year term as chair of this board, but I'm pretty certain we didn't ask Brian to check the archives or Wendy Luigi, but you probably chaired every committee that this board has had in one form or another during your incredible tenure. You've been a friend, a mentor, and a counselor to many of us around this table, and many who've sat around the table before, and importantly to this regent, you've been all of those things on many, many occasions. Your voice will be sorely missed at this table, at the committee tables, on the phone, and part of our everyday conversations and know that you brought a very valuable and thoughtful perspective to each and every one of those conversations into our governance deliberations. We thank you for that, and I'd like to recognize your service. Now, I know there's others here that would love to say something. I'm not going to open the opportunity for that. We will have an opportunity in a more appropriate setting, probably at East Cliff or somewhere, to recognize the service of all the regents who are completing their service to the board and the state and this institution this term a little bit later this spring. So stay tuned for that. Another sad note, the university lost a tremendous friend in higher education in the state of Minnesota with the passing of former state representative Tom Rukavina. He was chair of the higher education committee in the House for some period of time, a champion of public higher education. And I note him today because I don't think any public official ever embodied the sense of our public land grant nature more than Tom did, as he's in a very spirited way championed our land grant heritage and the permanent university fund. And I just note today that that fund, through some of Tom and other people's championing, endows some 226 chairs at this institution, a $4.25 million endowed scholarship account. That's what annually comes off of it. And Tom didn't create the permanent university fund, but he never stopped advocating for its use and its relation back to why we exist as an institution. In addition to chairs and scholarships, there is an endowed minerals research account and a whole lot of other things that happen. So I just note today that we will miss that advocacy, and anybody that understands the Byzantine world of public higher ed finance knows that Representative Rukavina was quite skilled in that regard too. So we will miss him. On a very upbeat note, I'll conclude my thoughts here by reporting on the work of the Presidential Transition Committee, co-chaired by Regent Beeson and Vice President Matt Kramer. The committee's been working to develop and implement a comprehensive transition plan that will help President-designate Gable develop deeper understanding of the university and relationships with key stakeholders. President-designate Gable was here earlier this month and has many plans for upcoming visits throughout the spring and coming months. And most importantly, I want to thank again Regent Beeson, Vice President Kramer, and all the members of that committee for their work as we look forward to onboarding our 17th president. That concludes my thoughts this morning, and we'll jump into additional business. Beginning with noting and receiving and the items for filing that are in the docket materials. And then the first item of action for us, or I guess the second since we adopted minutes, is the consent report, which has both a gifts report and a report of the naming committee, and I'd entertain a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. That carries, and we now come to the report of the Faculty Consultative Committee, and I believe I see Professor Pittenger out there. We'll invite her forward, and I think I can speak for all of my colleagues when I say that this is a key point in our year every year when we check in with the shared governance process and get to hear from the dedicated leadership of the Faculty Consultative Committee. Welcome, Professor Pittenger.
I'll go ahead and get started just as this is getting set up. So I'm Amy Pittenger, and I'm the new chair of the Faculty and Senate Consultative Committees, stepping in early because previous FCC chair Joe Constan has accepted an associate dean for research position within the College of Science and Engineering. So this report is delayed and abbreviated of the December report since the December board meetings were devoted to the presidential search candidate selection interview. The FCC leadership appreciates the board's openness to discussion. In the fall, Professor Constan and I met with new Regent Simonson, as well as Regents Cohen and Anderson. This winter and spring, Professor Phil Bowman, who has been newly elected as the FCC Vice Chair, who is from the College of Science and Engineering, he and I will follow up with the rest of you. In addition to Professor Bowman being elected FCC Vice Chair, Professor Rob Blair, a former elected member of the FCC, has been recently appointed as the new Faculty Legislative Liaison, replacing Professor Michael Oakes, who was named Associate Vice President for Research in the Office of the Vice President for Research. Professor Blair will be working closely with returning Faculty Legislative Liaison, Professor Donna Spanis Martin, as well as the staff from the Office of Government and Community Relations, to convey the faculty perspective to legislatures with respect to legislation and potential legislation affecting the university. Given the abbreviated nature of this report, I'll only mention a few selected topics that the FCC has been engaged in and that we identified at our annual retreat in August. This report does not describe all of the activities of the FCC this past semester. So Professor Constant provided an update of the FCC's efforts related to the Twin Cities liberal education curriculum and the President's initiative to prevent sexual misconduct at the December 2017 Board of Regents meeting. I'll simply note that the FCC continues to be actively engaged in both of these initiatives, and I'll give a more detailed update at the June meeting. We devoted a major portion of our efforts this year exploring and better understanding the different types of faculty classifications beyond the tenure track category. Vice President for Faculty and Academic Affairs, Rebecca Ropers-Hulman, was able to attend this portion of our retreat, and we continue to work with her and her team to understand these categories. There is also a half-day discussion topic at the Big Ten Academic Alliance Academic Governance Conference that I attended in October. And while particulars vary across the Big Ten, the collective discussion was informative, productive, and relevant to the FCC's discussions on this topic. And finally, with my updates, the search for the 17th president of the University of Minnesota has dominated the attention of the FCC, and I was honored to serve on the Presidential Search Advisory Committee. As has been stated previously by many on the search committee, it was a very positive experience, and I want to acknowledge the exemplary leadership of Regent Omari and co-chair Dean Laura Bloomberg. They are the primary reason the committee functioned so well and we had such a successful outcome. It was a unique opportunity for the regents, faculty, students, staff, and community members to work together toward a common goal, and I'm so grateful I was able to be a part of that effort. I'm going to finish my report with just a couple of spotlights on two faculty members at our institution. This is, of course, a strategy that past FCC Chair Joe Constant started in June 2018 report, and I will continue with my future reports as well. So I want to start with Dr. Katie Kazimanil. She's an associate professor in the School of Public Health, Division of Health Policy and Management, and director of the Rural Health Research Center, which is focused on improving the lives of rural residents and families. Dr. Kazimanil is also from Greater Minnesota and an alum of the University of Minnesota. One example I want to highlight is her work addressing rural maternity access. Her motivation to address the maternity needs of women in rural areas began with watching her grandmother grieve the loss of her sister from a likely preventable death associated with childbirth. She wanted to understand the problem so successful solutions could be implemented to prevent the pain her family endured. Last year, Dr. Kazimanil documented that more than half of all rural counties in the United States had no place for women to give birth. Her research on this topic has been published in top journals, including Health Affairs and the Journal of the American Medical Association, and covered extensively in the national media, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and NBC Nightly News. Dr. Kazimanil's research on rural maternity access was also featured at a U.S. Senate briefing in 2018, and her work was influential in the ultimate passage of the Improving Access to Maternity Care Act, a new law that will help address the lack of maternity services for rural residents across the nation. The next faculty member I'd like to highlight is Dr. Samir Abou-Fardeh. He's an associate professor in the Department of Math, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota Crookston. Dr. Abou-Fardeh's expertise is in the field of software engineering and information technology management, and his research area is cybersecurity. Dr. Abufarde's research focuses on understanding the phishing victim profile and how to use this information to keep people and systems safe from cyber attacks. Dr. Abufarde explains that the first line of defense in protecting people from phishing attacks is understanding the dynamics of phishing and the psychology of both the attacker and the victim, and analyzing users' decision-making strategies in reaction to phishing attacks. His work is unique because it does not focus on cybersecurity tools, but rather the profiles of cyber attack victims. Perpetrators of cyber attacks use psychological vulnerabilities to trick people into providing information, crimes that lead to several $1 billion of lost revenue each year. Dr. Abufarde and his multidisciplinary team develop and test new data mining-based tools, techniques that can be used to protect against phishing attacks. Dr. Abufarde also has undergraduate students on his research team, which enhances the educational experience of the University of Minnesota Crookston students lucky enough to get to contribute to this important work. Dr. Abufarde's work is helping to keep the people and systems of Minnesota and the nation safer from phishing attacks and providing valuable research experiences to the future software engineers and IT professionals of our state. The faculty are making Minnesota, the nation, and the world a better and safer place on many fronts, and are also providing excellent learning experiences for students, undergraduate, graduate, and professional, and all in the process. So we would be very happy to facilitate a meeting so that you can get to know our faculty and learn about their research in whatever format would be best. Please let me know if you're interested in pursuing this further. Finally, I'd like to publicly thank Professor Joe Constant for his extensive service over 20 years of government, faculty governance, and to share with you how much I enjoyed working with him when I was FCC Vice Chair. I also want to acknowledge all of the excellent support from the University Senate staff, but especially Ms. Renee Dempsey. And additionally, I want to recognize all the student, staff, and faculty involved in governance who volunteer their time and effort to make the University of Minnesota's governance model the robust model it is. I also want to thank you, the Board of Regents, and the President, and the Provost, and the University administration for your open and engaged consultation and commitment to shared government as a value and a process. Attending the Big Ten Academic Alliance Conference this past October and participating on the Presidential Search Advisory Committee this past fall has further confirmed to me how lucky we are to have such a long history of robust shared governance. It is at the center of why we are such an amazing institution. With that, I conclude my report.
Thank you, Professor Pittenger. And before I ask my colleagues to raise any questions or open any more of a dialogue with you, I want to thank you for recognizing Professor Constant's contributions. Normally we would have that opportunity here, but as you said, he's answered the call to tackle leadership opportunities, and I know he's excited about that. But one of the great things that we get to do in a leadership role on this board is interface with the leadership of the FCC, and I remain amazed, 8 years into this role, and 4 of those in leadership, by the quality and talent of the faculty that step forward to tackle. It's never easy leading, and you don't get paid any extra to do it, I don't think, and we're grateful, and the institution is grateful for you stepping forward to do that. So thank you, and please thank Professor Constant when you see him again. Colleagues, questions and thoughts? Regional Mari.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, Professor Pittenger, for all that you do, and it was a privilege to serve with you and the other 6 faculty on the Presidential Search Committee. I have a question actually that tails off of earlier's meeting, because I saw you here when we were talking about strategic planning. And so I wonder what your thoughts are on the state of strategic planning for the institution, how you would advise that we might go about it, just from what you've heard or your previous experience, and what knowledge you might bring to offer to us as we embark on that.
Professor Pittenger.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, Regional Murray. That's a big question. Mm-hmm. I do think that faculty have a unique perspective, and we also are sort of in a hub position with regard to what's happening with employers and our students, sending students out into internships and those sorts of things. And we're also experimenting with different kinds of educational formats and models that I think what I really heard was the very tail end about the online education component. And I think the faculty perspective specifically on that can be further engaged. And I think we've got some interesting perspectives that could help.
I'm going to put a finer point on that, perhaps. Thank you, Regional Murray, for connecting the dots between that conversation and this one. And if Professor Constant were here, and you'll certainly recall some of the things that I've asked about, and I think it didn't come to a head today, but as we work on a system-wide strategic plan, and as we have been working on it with President Kaler and his administration, continue to refine and define that going forward. I think one of the classic tussles that the institution can get into is how do we maintain a focus on global excellence in endeavors and disciplines that matter to the world, to the nation, to the region, and as you heard today, touching things that are super important to Minnesota, and yet finding faculty that want to work on those Minnesota issues while also tackling things that matter to the world. And I'd be interested if you have any thoughts, because we're going to be coming to the faculty as we continue to refine elements of that. And the Provost and the President have already outlined a great Grand Challenges program, but any finer point you can put on it, or perhaps just get a heads up here that, we'll be looking for that kind of input. How do we deliver what Minnesota needs and yet also maintain a global excellence? And I'd be interested in President Kaler's thoughts on that too. So we'll start with you.
Okay, Chair McMillan, members of the board. I think I'll probably just reiterate what we've said in previous meetings, which is we don't necessarily, I think as a faculty body, we don't see a conflict there. The kinds of problems and challenges that face Minnesota are not necessarily different from what face the rest of the nation and the world. I think the two examples of the faculty spotlights that I just provided are really good examples. Cybersecurity is something very important to us in this state, and it's important across the globe. That's true for things such as maternity access, health access in general in rural areas. Those are things across the world that we need to think creatively about. And I think we're really lucky to have faculty that are thinking really unique ways about not only how to address them here, but how those strategies could be adapted to meet challenges across the globe, and vice versa. I think sometimes we can come up with examples of something working far away and be able to use that and apply it to our own state.
Very good, thank you. I don't see any other hands up or people flagging my attention, so we'll thank you for your time and your leadership commitment, and move on to the 2018 University Performance and Accountability Report. And while Acting Provost Mcmaster is wandering up this way to give us an introduction of the report, President Kaler, would you like to frame this up?
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Just very briefly, this is here for action this month. We have reviewed it. You have had the document in front of you. I think this is a very valuable compilation across the spectrum of activities at the University of Minnesota, and it shows very clearly, I believe, a very highly performing institution, and one that is both explicitly and implicitly accountable for what we do. So I will turn over to Acting Provost Mcmaster. I think we have a small slide deck, and then we'll be open for questions and ask for approval.
Very good. Thank you, President Kaler, and welcome again, Acting Provost Mcmaster. You've been busy the last few days, so thanks.
Sure. Chair McMillan and members of the board, I'm pleased to present to you the 2018 University Performance and Accountability Report, which we distributed earlier. As a reminder, the draft report appeared in the December docket for your review, with instructions to bring to our attention concerns or areas in need of adjustment. Today, we bring the final report for your approval. This version does not have any substantial changes, only corrections where the section authors and proofreaders noted typographical errors or need for clarification. As in previous years, we have also produced a companion brochure that highlights the key takeaways from the report and connects the progress card measures to the narrative you have. The final report and the brochure appear in the docket, and we provided each of you with print copies. These have been distributed to you in advance, and we have copies here for other meeting attendees to take with them. The report and brochure will be sent to state legislators by our Office of Government and Community Relations. I'll also note that we make the report and highlights brochure available for download online and can send printed copies to anyone who requests them. Last month's docket gave a brief background on the history of this report's creation, and the purpose of this report as a fundamental planning document was discussed this past year as the Governance and Policy Committee meeting took up the board operations policy. That revised policy reflects the new name of this report, which no longer has the word plan in the title. This reflects that the system-wide strategic plan will serve as the foundational planning document, whereas this report will continue to be a retrospective reporting on the performance of the university and our accountability to the public for accomplishing the mission of the university. As the system-wide strategic plan is developed and further nurtured, it will of course inform the framework and content of this report. So today, in the interest of time and in the recognition of the fact that much of the data in this report is discussed more extensively in conversations throughout this month's meeting and throughout the rest of the year, I'd like to very briefly highlight a few significant parts of the report. I will also mention that Regent Clyde Allen loved this report and kept a copy in his trunk throughout the year. So the first slide is around graduation rates. That's a major piece of the report documenting the student progress on each of the 5 campuses. This particular slide shows first-year retention, 4-year graduation, 6-year graduation, and your metrics for the 5 campuses. The next slide shows the progress that the Twin Cities campuses made related to graduation rates. Each of the campuses has made progress on these metrics, and again, the details are provided in the report. In graduate education, we focus on diversity and the progress that was made in diversifying the graduate programs. This is an impressive chart that shows over the last 4 years the increase, the percent change in diversity in each of the major racial ethnic categories. And so this represents significant progress on that front. Yesterday, we talked about professional programs at the university, and this particular chart shows the number of degrees awarded in a single year for some of the major professional programs. Noted in particular that business administration, the MED in education, and medicine all produced over 200 degrees. I won't say much about this because there's going to be a report later in this session by Vice President Kramer on research rankings and research activity, but the University of Minnesota continues to be a major player and ranked in the top 10 public universities for research productivity. Finally, there's a section in the report on outreach and engagement, and there are many, many examples from nearly all the colleges of activity involving outreach and touch points with the community. These are just a sample of some of the many examples we provide as part of the tripartite mission of the university. So with that, I'll finish with some of the faculty awards the university has received since 2012. We continue to be a major player in this space. In particular, note the National Academy of Engineering, the National Academy of Medicine, the National Academy of Sciences, all among the most prestigious scientific organizations in the country. With that, I'll finish and see if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you, Acting Provost Mcmaster. Thoughts, questions, anything for our Provost? Regent Beeson.
Take
Mr. Chair, I'll defer to Regent Cohen.
Regent Cohen.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Thanks, Chair McMillan. And Acting Provost Mcmaster, I just want to compliment you on the report, but also on this brochure. I know this has been we've had the brochure part for a few years, but I think it's particularly helpful, very helpful for the legislators and for people who may not be interested in reading every page of the report. It's such an important synopsis for the university. So I really appreciate you doing that and all the hard work that goes behind this.
I will pass that along to the creators of that.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regent Rocha talked about the contributions that Mr. Tuttle would have made back in the 19th century. It would be interesting to get the report from 1852, which would have been the year after we reformed. I predict it wasn't as voluminous or in color, but it probably had the same sorts of issues, really. These issues are different, but they're also the very same year after year after year. This is an improved report, an important report. Nothing can capture the work of our students and our faculty and our students. If you think about the impact, just simply can't do it. These are all important accomplishments, but the people are really what creates the value for the people of the state. We all know that, but just felt like this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Other questions for our acting provost? Hearing none, then I would move to Regional Maury.
Yeah, thank you, Chair McMillan. I just want to extend the thanks to your full staff who worked on this, because I know this is a beast of a report. So absolutely, I don't know if they're here or maybe they're listening if people do that. So thanks to them as well.
The primary author of the report, Marlo Walshans, is here today, so she should receive major thanks for this.
Thank you.
Well, you have the gratitude of the board. Thank you for being here and for what, as Regional Maury says, is a beast, a Herculean effort, I'm sure, to pull together. And
yes,
and
but it's
create.
not just me. Thank you.
Good. Is there we need to move and approve this, so is there a motion to do so?
So moved.
Very good. Moved and seconded, I think, with that other motion. Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Very good. The 2018 report, absent the word plan, is approved. Which takes us to, let's see, item 8 on our agenda, the law school metrics and investment strategy update. I see Dean Jenkins headed up this way, and so is our Senior Vice President, Brian Burnett. So we will let you get situated there and then look forward to your report. President Kaler, I don't know that you have any framing remarks here, but we will jump straight in with Dean Jenkins.
Great. Good morning. Thank you, Chairman McMillan and members of the board. I'm happy to be back here to update you on the law school and our progress toward eliminating our structural imbalance and reaching financial stability. I'm pleased to report that the law school is making excellent progress on the plan that we presented to you back in May of 2018. As you know, we worked closely with the Joint Financial Task Force, which was made up of law school senior administration, university budget and finance, and the provost office, representatives from all three, to develop a plan to analyze and respond to the law school's structural imbalance, which the school has been facing for several years. The plan seeks to resolve that imbalance by the end of fiscal 2021. The plan required the law school to reduce expenses, to increase revenues, to increase enrollment, all along with ongoing monitoring and recommendations as needed by the Joint Task Force. In addition, the plan also includes increasing the law school's level of O&M support over 3 years, the first of which was approved for the fiscal year. And as you may also recall, last year, the Board of Regents passed a resolution that asked the Joint Task Force to develop a monitoring tool to measure that progress. And so we designed a progress report tool over the summer that was then shared with you in September, and you should have that in front of you. The progress card has 18 different metrics covering financial performance and operations, enrollment, student outcomes. And we used a pretty simple green, yellow, red system, right? The green meant meeting or exceeding the target, yellow is close, and red is off target. And as the full progress report indicates, we were able to achieve 18 greens in our first year. So we are making outstanding progress. Most notably on overall financial progress, we met the plan's key fiscal targets on the reduction of the structural imbalance and the amount of the year-end transfer. The other 6 financial and enrollment metrics were met as well. Part of the story here, I think, is that in fall of 2018, the law school was able to enroll its largest first-year JD class in 7 years. We actually exceeded our enrollment target that we had set, which in and of itself was an increase, but we exceeded that target by 9%. We also continue to tighten our fiscal belt, reducing non-student aid expenses by 1/3 compared to where they were in 2016. The latter 10 metrics in the report are related to operations and outcomes. They were all also green. Those measures intended to demonstrate the fiscal responsibility, the sound management, but also quality inputs and outcomes that are going to be vital to our long-term success and the strategy that we've developed. Some of the highlights here include the high quality of that incoming class. So we did not sacrifice quality at all, which has, I think, been something of a hallmark for our law school, something that employers look for us to provide, with a median LSAT score up to the 90th percentile, our students passing the bar at 91%, and that compares to the state average of 81%. Great employment outcomes, with 90% of our students achieving full-time, long-term JD required employment within 10 months of graduation. That's 9 percentage points above the national average. And just to, again, put that in some context, our rate was 79% in 2016. 75% of the law clerks at the Minnesota Supreme Court this year are Minnesota law grads, a stat that we're very proud of. I'll also happily note that approximately 2/3 of our students stay in Minnesota to practice, fueling the talent that our law firms and corporations and government agencies and communities need. So we continue to move in the right direction in reducing the structural imbalance. In fact, our plan had projected that the law school would end fiscal 18, the year that ended in June, with a 4.1 million imbalance. We actually came in 200,000 under our plan, so down to 3.9 million. And as of now, I'm projecting that at the end of this fiscal year 19, we will again meet our goal. The plan calls for our imbalance to be down to 2.9 million as it makes its way towards that zero by 2021. And although projections such as these can't be made with certainty, we certainly project, as of now, the range to be between 2.9 and 2.5 million when we come to the end of the fiscal year. I assure you this has not been easy. Our faculty and staff are working very hard. They are deeply committed to the plan. It's something that we've been communicating, talking about, really getting community buy-in on that plan. But it has meant a lot of cuts, a lot of change, lower salary increases for our faculty and P&A employees than those received by the rest of the university for 4 out of the last 5 years. So again, I want to assure you that this has not been easy, but it is something that we are taking very seriously, and we are very committed to success. As far as what I see coming down the pike, I remain optimistic. We have a great plan and we're executing on it. But of course, we operate within a market. And there are external forces that always play a role, no matter how well-planned, well-defined your plan is. So as I think about trends and potential tailwinds, as well as potential headwinds, I'm buoyed by some things and I'm concerned by some things. So I thought I'd share a few of those with you. On the positive side, in green on the slide, you'll see some numbers about applications. Actually, when we made this slide a few weeks ago, our applications were up 20%. Now it's about 12%. But the national average is down 5%. So we are outperforming the market considerably when you look at it that way. So I still think that's very good news for us. Our alumni have been generous and engaged in supporting us. This is especially important because the law school relies heavily, or more heavily than many other academic units on campus, for gift income as part of our revenues. The campaign is going extraordinarily well, tracking ahead of schedule, and our annual fund hit a record this past year, the highest annual fund that we've ever raised. So again, good news there. And our streamlining of operations that we're doing it in ways that are smart, that have allowed us to maintain our global reputation, to continue to deliver first-rate programs, ensuring that Minnesota law is a top choice for the country's best law students, and that our faculty is world-class, and that they are supported and at the top of their fields. Now, what keeps me up at night? What am I concerned about? Well, one thing would be the uncertain global environment and its impact on foreign student enrollments. Our second largest program, next to the JD program, is an academic program called the LLM. And that is a program for foreign trained lawyers. So they're lawyers in their home countries who come to the US for 1 year to learn about American law. And last week, the Council of Graduate Schools released a report that found that applications from international students to U.S. graduate schools dropped for the second year in a row. And in our LLM program, we saw enrollment drop 25% last year. And I will confess that that was not part of our plan. That was not something that we had, and that had financial implications. So trends in that area are something that at least I'm watching closely. Another thing is, in general, competitive pressures that we face to limit tuition increases. We are already among the top 5 among public universities, certainly in our peer group of the top 15 public law schools. So we feel competitive market pressures to limit future increases. In addition, our 7 closest competitors for students, which are a mix of public and private peers, all increased their median scholarships awards to students compared to 2016. When we looked at that comparative list, we were the only ones who didn't. So there's a lot of pressure there, and in fact, those ranked just below us provided even more aid. So the competitive pressures are real and may challenge us. So those are the things that we're continuing to monitor and thinking about. But I do want to be clear that first off, I want to, express my gratitude for the support of several individuals. I want to start with President Kaler and his support for our plan and has made an enormous difference, and we're greatly appreciative. Of course, the support of this board has made an enormous difference in that as well, and Provost Hansen, who has been deeply engaged and supportive as well. Our joint task force, which, as I mentioned, includes colleagues from the University budget office, the provost office, the law school, we work extraordinarily well. We work collaboratively, we work effectively, and it has been a great partnership. We're keeping our plan on track. We are making progress as promised, and as a result, we are moving forward in ways that I'm really excited about. So accordingly, the President's fiscal 20 budget will include a recommendation for year 2 funding in accordance with our joint plan so that we can press forward, press ahead, and continue to move toward that goal that we all set together. So with that, I think...
Yeah, I would just, if I can comment, Mr.
Senior
Chairman.
Vice President Burnett, please.
Yes, chairing the Joint Financial Oversight Committee, I can report to the board that much the same as Dean Jenkins, that the law school has made tremendous progress, I think, in the time we've put it under this microscope. Obviously, it's still an external dynamic that they live in this world of changing law dynamics, both nationally and in the Midwest. But I think that we're seeing good progress, and obviously this is something we're thinking about as we bring forth the FY20 budget. I think notionally at this point, we see this as part of our overall request at this time, and happy to take any questions from the board.
Good, thank you. Thank you both. I'm not a banker. We have one on the board. It's, to me, I would call it a workout plan, and that's what it looks and feels like, and it looks like, you know, pretty positive early returns on how that plan's coming together. I was alarmed as I read it and, you know, thinking about what elements of this workout plan, if you will, are at risk, and that LLM decline looked a little frightening. I think between Regent Rocha and I, we've probably had the privilege of doing more of your commencements than anybody, and that's a time when you realize just how significant that program is. You realize it every day, but we see it when we get to be part of that ceremony. And could you, before I get the rest of the board engaged here, could you put a little finer point on what drove that? Was that because, again, I'm making up the example, Georgetown's recruiting more heavily and they're getting more students, or is it because somebody else is discounting, or is it because of the world we live in today where international, you know, whether it's immigration or just border security, all that stuff, you know, there's a lot going on in the political sphere that has people perhaps not investing in year-long trips abroad?
Yes, the answer is yes, Chairman McMillan, to all of those questions. So again, the LLM, the Masters in Law, the international program they're all foreign trained lawyers. So of course, what's happening? So that's why I started by quoting that trend that's happening with international education across many fields is impacting our program, and certainly what's happening in politics is making a difference, because what really the students are looking for is an international experience, and that doesn't have to be in the U.S. So we're facing competition from law schools in Canada, law schools in Europe for the same market, if you will, for those students who are looking for that international experience. Now, in addition, we do have the law schools on the coast that certainly have a disproportionate number of those international law students who come to the U.S. for those degrees that we're competing with. So over 4 years, we've seen the numbers decline, in part because of the third factor that you alluded to, which is the market has changed. As the JD market, as you know, has changed, many law schools have looked to increase their revenues. So they started saying, let's expand our LLM program, or let's start an LLM program. So as a result, there's more competition and more price discounting for the degree than there was. So all of those factors are conspiring to create challenges there. So in 2015, we had 74 LLMs. This year, we had 37.
Okay, thank you. Before I get myself in trouble with any more banking analogies, I'll turn to Regent Beeson.
Mr. Chair, good to stay in your swim lanes. Thanks, Dean, for the report. The it makes me think about the conversation we had about the importance of national ranking and how much further deterioration there might be under the international program had we not made the decision to keep the ranking and the quality of the program where it is. But my question is about, you mentioned 65% of the graduates, I believe, stay in town, work. What about the out-of-state students? What's our retention rate? Is it 25% or 10%, or how many stay here? And how do we, because there are flight risks, if you will, to leave town after they graduate, what are we doing to keep them in the Twin Cities and Minnesota to work after we've invested and subsidize their education for 3 years?
Dean Jenkins.
Thank you, Regent Beeson and Chair McMillan. I'll respond to those two issues that you raised. First is, I think the ranking has had an enormous impact on us. We saw our yield, so the percentage of students who we've made offers to who accepted, increased dramatically last year. It was a 50% increase, far more than we had anticipated or planned for. And I think part of that was the fact that our ranking moved into the top 20, I'm guessing was a part of that. Now, I think there are lots of other things that we were doing and lots of strategies that we've been employing that may have helped that, since that was one of our strategic goals. But I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we didn't think that that was part of the story as well on the JD side. And I think similarly on the LLM side. With respect to your second question, 1/3 of our students that we enroll are from in-state, yet 2/3 remain in Minnesota. So we are doing a great job of attracting talent to our law school. I like to think of us as a magnet for talent, and then we connect them to our community, to our employers, and 2/3 of all law students end up staying.
Thank you, Regent Simonson. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Vice President. I probably should know this one, but you talk about recruitment enhancement. What specific, can you give us a little more idea of what you're doing specifically there? And then what is your ultimate goal and what's your capacity? I'd like to know that. And then are there employment specialties that are areas that you're focusing on for the job market?
Dean Jenkins.
Thank you, Regent Simonson and Chair McMillan. We have 11 concentrations at the law school. Of course, like all law schools, we're generalist, if you will, but at the same time, we like to highlight some of our program area strengths. So the 11, I don't know that I can remember them all off the top of my head, but including litigation, certainly, intellectual property, corporate law, human rights, criminal justice, et cetera. So we're providing lawyers for a range of areas, as all law schools do. You can't be an effective law school and say, oh, we're going to be the law school that doesn't teach con law or doesn't teach tax. That doesn't work in our area. So we really prepare law students for all areas of practice. And there was a second part, recruitment. Thank you. In terms of recruiting, we are doing a number of new and exciting things that are working well. So we went back to the drawing board and did some data analysis about where we were getting students from and where we were visiting students, and made some changes there in terms of where our team of admissions counselors are visiting. That's made a huge difference. We've really revamped our communication strategy, our admissions parts of the website, and our outreach plan there. We've been a lot more, I think, strategic in developing relationships with advisors at the undergraduate level. So the pre-law advisors and other recommenders who tend to be what we call the influencers there. there so that we can help folks understand what a great law school we have, and can partner with them and arm them with information that's making a difference in impacting the students there, and really, I think in all kinds of ways, thinking about our communications, thinking about our brand, thinking about our touchstones, the way we touch students and connect with students in a more sophisticated, I don't want to use consumer, probably isn't the right word, but we're borrowing from consumer outreach methods and trying to incorporate that to develop positive relationships with prospective students that they turn into admitted and then enrolled students.
Thank you.
Capacity and enrollment goals.
The plan is for enrollment levels of 200. The plan, let's see, 200, 600. Let's see if I can 215 times 3, so 700, 600, and then with the LLMs on top. Up there, so about 700 once you include JDs and LMs together.
Very good. Thank you. Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Just chuckling that you aren't part of the math department when we ask you those questions. But first,
on the spot. It's
on the spot. Yeah, I'm just glad we got different professors for different things.
Remember the swim lane comment of Regent Beeson here. So
the new metric system, I think I'm just going to give you some brief things that I wrote down here. It's good to have, easy to understand. I like it. I know what we've asked you to do is reducing the budget while keeping or improving national rankings is hard. It's not easy. I mean, it's not easy. I also think over 170 years of this university, the 51 different budget units at this point in time, every once in a while one of them gets out of whack, and it's just a matter of bringing it back. I think from my point of view as director of, or chair of the finance, I know Senior Vice President Burnett and his team have been putting your people through the financial university and keeping you to the feet to the flames, if you so, about spending money, and I think that's good, and it's going to keep you on task. I think, these are some statistics I thought that I just need a little bit of explanation. They look good to me. And I'll name 3 things I saw and just ask you to comment. 90th percentile on LSAT tests. You're doing really well getting those people. I saw your bar passage as a 91% compared to 81% of in-state peers. And I think I heard you say the university used to have a 79% bar passage, so you're improving that. If you could tell me what the national number is. And finally, on your goal of what we have done, you expressed concern that tuition is about as high as it can be. How much of your plan is raising tuition and how much of it is reducing costs?
Dean Jenkins.
Thank you, Regent Anderson and Chair McMillan. The 3 numbers that you mentioned, happy to talk about them. The LSAT does represent an increase for us of 1 point, so moving for the median of the entering class. So it was 163 and now is 164. So that 164 represents the 90th percentile on the test. So obviously a median means half the students are at that or above, and the other half are not. But it's really quite strong and represents the strength of the student body there, which is outstanding. The bar results are all state by state. So it's really hard to to do that, and of course they vary, the pass rates. But yes, the median that I quoted was based on the July test, which is where the overwhelming majority of our students will take it after graduating in May there, and we saw a substantial spread. So in fact, if you actually pull Minnesota out of the state average, so if you're really comparing our students to everybody else, the spread is actually 14 points there. That's how far we're outperforming the rest of the pack, if you will, compared to the other law schools that provide test takers in Minnesota. But our students do very well for those when they take the test out of state. But of course, each state has a different average.
The final question was on tuition. If you're not able to raise tuition, what we maybe believe you could, does that then generate into more sometime, I don't want to call them cuts, but sometimes cost containment?
Yes, it does. So certainly our plan does include modest tuition increases of 2% during the time of the plan. But that's something that I'm saying we're monitoring that numbers, because our tuition compared to Wisconsin or Iowa is already higher than theirs. So it's more something that I'm looking out on the horizon, thinking about, but we are committed to this plan and our goals. And so of course, cost containment would come, from other places if we were to have to make changes, but there are no plans for freezing.
Thank you for working so hard on this and keeping our rankings at or improving. So thank you very much for working hard on it.
Thank you.
All right, I've got 3 regents to go, and we're quickly exhausting our time here. So Regent Powell, then Rocha, then Shu, and then I'm going to move us on. Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair. And Dean Jenkins, congratulations on the good progress. It's encouraging. So I just have a quick one. Maybe a few comments on national trends in enrollment. Is that helping us a bit, or still soft, or what's the trend there?
Well,
Dean Jenkins.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chairman Powell and Chairman McMillan. It's still a soft market. There's no question about that. So if I were to show you a graph of historically back at the high, we had 100 nationally, over 100,000 law school applicants in 2004, almost 90 in 2010. Then we hit lows of around 55,000, and we're up to about 60,000. So we're improving, but not anywhere near the heights where we were even as recently as 2010. So there's still a long ways to go. And as I mentioned, so far this year, they're actually down nationally 5% on over last year, even though our law school's applications are up.
Thank you.
Regent Powell, do you have a follow-up? Is it? Okay, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the bar, I haven't sort of paid attention to this stuff like you do, right, when you're coming out of law school, but does the University of Wisconsin Law School still have the automatic bar passage? And if you graduate from the University of Wisconsin Law School, I believe you automatically are admitted to the bar without having to take the bar exam in the state. Is that accurate? And I was kind of curious as to why Minnesota hadn't pursued that, because obviously that takes your 91% to 100%. Now, is the 91% of the Minnesota bar, or is that tracking people taking the bar in other states?
The diploma privilege, huh?
Indeed.
Dean Jenkins?
Indeed. Regent Rocha and Chairman McMillan, happy to talk about that. The 91% that was the Minnesota bar example. If we added all bars across, it might move. It's similar. It's in a similar range. Probably high 89% would be my guess. But the diploma privilege is unique to Wisconsin. They are, I believe, now the only state left that still has the diploma privilege. So that's certainly not the trend nationally. So I don't think the bar examiners of Minnesota have any inclination to move to what's called the diploma privilege, which means if you go to a school in Wisconsin, a law school in Wisconsin, you're automatically admitted to the bar. That's unique to Wisconsin.
Follow-up, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That wasn't even my fundamental question, but it always was kind of interesting because you sort of say that, well, if you're upholding the standards of the classes you have to pass to get your diploma, should that not qualify you? So, but it sounds like that debate has gone a different direction over time. I congratulate you also on getting your arms around this. As you know, I know you walked into the circumstance and you've been working very hard since you've been here to come up with a way to move us in the right direction, and it appears that we're heading in that right direction. This has actually been a very like a crystal clear example of how we sort of have values that we pursue, and part of my issue is what are we paying to do certain things. In this case, it's the class rank, or the national ranking has been a big part of, I think, where we've ended up where we are. At least that's as it's been described to me by folks at the law school. And if you go back 20 years, we were had emerged into the top 20 among law schools, and we were at some point, I think, even bumping up against 15. And it's very competitive, and we do very well considering part of the analysis is based on the market and starting salaries. Well, we're reasonably priced compared to people coming out of the coastal schools, and I think so. I've always been impressed that we're able to be up there because we overcome coastal bias as well as some of the other analyses. But then looking at the school itself, we were larger classes then, and the facility supports that. It's actually a bigger facility now with the additions on what is now Mondale Hall. But we saw yesterday in the graduate report, graduate and professional education report, that it showed 6,000 openings for law graduates in the state. That surprised me. But not entirely, because when you see through the bench and bar and other, there are lots of positions being advertised. One of my questions, I'll ask a question and then I have a comment on it. But what would be the impact of moving to a larger class? And part of the reason I bring that up is when I was making a determination about where to go. University of Minnesota was attractive for two reasons. First, it was a highly ranked school. I mean, then there's obvious stuff. It's this home state, and I'm serving on this board. But also the tuition was more reasonable compared to a private school or the other competing schools in the market. That difference, I think, has really leveled off, or it's been reduced over time to where the University of Minnesota tuition, and I think by necessity, as you've got to a smaller class size. When you were admitted to the University of Minnesota Law School, it was like getting a scholarship compared to one of the other law schools in this area. Would a larger class allow you to recapture some of that gap? And then the last thing I'll say about a larger class over time, and that's not necessarily the point of this conversation, but as we have the University of St. Thomas, which is very well funded and has burst onto the scene with its law school and has I think it's kind of the 800-pound gorilla in this market for really gaining in its stature. Over time, where your graduates come from can sometimes have a pretty strong indication about where your future graduates are going to have success. Our various courts across the state, the Supreme Court and other courts, have a lot of University of Minnesota law graduates. Well, over time, if they're producing more graduates, and we're a smaller school, we won't necessarily have the advantage of the University of Minnesota really having a lot to say about the legal culture in the state. So those are just a couple questions about whether there would be an advantage to having a larger class, economically, from a tuition standpoint, from a state need, if there really are that many openings that are needed. And I'm just kind of interested in your perspective on that as we go forward.
Dean Jenkins.
Thank you, Regent Rocha and Chair McMillan. I want to point out that our plan does include an increase in the class, and so that's what we've done. But we've done it in a way that we think is responsible and that we think is manageable and what we think the market needs from us. I think going beyond what we've planned for in the plan would have devastating effects for the law school in almost every respect. I think that, economically, it would not generate the income that we would need because of what's happening with financial aid and what's happening in the market. You mentioned St. Thomas. They are among I saw a report having the top 10 schools in the country in terms of the highest scholarships that they award. So 75% of their students are paying half, receive half or more, half to full tuition. So in order to do that, they're heavily subsidized, and the bar rates of the other schools in the states are not as strong as ours. So there are consequences to that. A school has to be designed to serve those kinds of students. The report that was mentioned yesterday of 6,000 jobs, remember, those aren't all entry-level jobs, really. So we're really paying attention to the entry-level market that we're most concerned about. And that was over a 10-year period. So, when you think about the numbers there of 600 a year and the number of graduates that we're producing that stay in the state, we're actually providing, a quarter to a third of those jobs already are taken by our students. I think that what we find when we talk to the national experts, so the National Association of Law Placements, is actually encouraging law schools not to move too briskly to expand classes because of what happened with the legal market a few years ago that really collapsed, and many think that that's what precipitated the problems in JD enrollments was that decline in the job market. And so we don't want to get ahead of ourselves until we know for sure that the jobs are there. Our career services department right now works very hard to place our students in the high quality jobs that we have. We do that. We're really proud of what we do, but it takes a lot of work. So I don't think that we would benefit from a significantly larger class.
All right, thank you, Dean Jenkins. And Regent Hsu, you're going to close us up here, and I have to ask you to go quick if you can.
Well, I'll try. Thank you for the presentation. Are there any backup slides, by the way, that we didn't see? Because I was actually expecting more of a historical view, because you did not. You came in the middle of this, so I want to try and be as thoughtful as possible on this. But this problem's been going on. It predates me and many of us on the board. But going back to FY 13 and 14, we've transferred looks like $21.05 million in year-end transfers since 2013. And then we've been steadily increasing the O&M allocation over the years to the point where now you're asking for another 1.5 next year, and then another 1.3 the following year, and that takes us up to in a total increase of allocation of over $11 million, which then would be recurring each year after that. And so the question I ask is, what are you doing with the 1.5 next year, and then the 1.3 the following year? And is there going to be any chance to reduce that in the future? Because otherwise, we're spending an incredible amount of money to support relatively few number of students, and resources have to come from somewhere. And we have a lot of people in this room who are probably fighting for a couple million here and there. And here we're talking about I think 46.5 million to date, if my math is correct, and 10 or 11 million each year. And I think I brought this up during the last budget cycle, but, if we could get a better, I'm out of time here, but if we could get a better accounting of this, we've received memos over the years, but we don't have anything that takes us up to current date. But for today, if you could someone could tell me what the 1.5 for this next budget is, and then the 1.3 for the next year.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. In the context of answering that, perhaps there is a follow-up opportunity here with some background information for Regent Hsu and anybody else. So maybe do the best you can in a quick answer here, and then we got to move on.
Mr. Chairman, Regent Hsu, it is covering the deficit that they're still running. Okay. And this is not the high point of the O&M allocation to the law school. When they were living high on a lot of tuition and the market was different, the university reduced O&M to the law school. So we're kind of bringing that back in a balanced way, in a methodical way, while holding them accountable for their expenditures that match this class in this new reality. So I can just tell you that we evolve on these things, and the markets that our graduate programs, particularly the law school, operate in change over time. It's a function of that, and we're reinvesting. So the money's going to cover a deficit that continues to this day.
Can you both connect with Regent Hsu afterward or through the board office and make sure he gets the historic information he's interested in?
Happy to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you both, and we will move on to the research and commercialization of intellectual property. As Vice President Kramer comes up, President Kaler, maybe you'd give us some framing thoughts here.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I don't want to fall into the trap of introducing the introduction, so I'll simply be brief in telling you you'll look forward to a report with a record amount of sponsored research, a record number of new licenses, largest ever number of research agreements, one of the nation's top 10 public research universities with a tremendous economic impact. And I want to conclude my remarks by thanking Vice President Kramer, his colleagues in the Office of the Vice President for research, and a really remarkable large number of research faculty and staff at our great university, and terrific student researchers. Vice President Kramer.
Yes, welcome to the board, and thank you for jumping in with both feet, arms, head, everything else. I had the chance to see firsthand your commitment to getting out and about, and up in Duluth, where you were examining and getting to know some of the research things going on there a week ago, 2 weeks ago. Equally cold day.
It was cold.
Welcome.
Thank you, Chair McMillan, President Kaler, members of the board. It's my privilege to have a chance to make this annual report to you, which summarizes our activities in research and in technology commercialization. And I will say that the state of the university's research mission is strong, but let's dig into some details. So let me begin by telling you about my office's values. So we are a system office. We support the work of researchers across the system. And in particular, we do that through partnership. So we try to connect researchers and permit them to make progress on grand challenges that are outlined in the university's strategic planning framework. We empower discovery, because that's what research is. It's pushing back against the boundaries of what we don't know in order to harvest new knowledge from that darkness. And finally, we value integrity in all aspects of our mission, but in particular in the research aspect. If we were ever to lose trust, then it's extraordinarily hard to regain that. And so my office has compliance functions that monitor various research efforts in order to comply with federal standards, with board policies, and we commit very strongly to integrity, to include a Research Ethics Week, which we'll be launching next month with some outstanding programming, I might add, from the Consortium for Law and Values, which is a center within my office. I'm going to discuss with you today some data. Data are good. I'm also going to offer some anecdotes, because anecdotes tend to be more personal and one can grasp them. But let's try to do a bit of a mix, but let's start with some data. So I want to share with you some research statistics from this latest fiscal year. And in particular, let's look at the awards by source in fiscal year 2018. So they're shown here in the colorful wheel, with the largest source of funding being the National Institutes of Health at a bit more than 1/4 of our total external awards. And as we go around, you see our partner, the state, provides a substantial amount of funding, then the National Science Foundation. Universities and colleges is subcontracts, so those may well be awards from some of these federal agencies, but the prime recipient of that award is another institution, and our researchers are collaborating with individuals at those institutions, and they pass those dollars to us. Business and industry is next at $64 million. $44 million is other private entities, foundations, and the like, and so on. I won't go through absolutely everything on the wheel. I'll mention that $793 million number is a record amount, and it reflects a 6.5% increase over our prior fiscal year's awards. And the federal government, incidentally, increased its R&D spend by 4.7% over that same time period. So we're sort of outperforming what the market provided, if you will. I'll just rearrange the wheel ever so slightly to give you a feel for what the federal portion of those awards is, and it's 62%, so just under 2/3, and the other sources make up the rest. And just because of recent past history, I thought some of you might be interested to see which were the agencies of the federal government that were affected by the partial shutdown. And they're shown here, broken out. The primary one is the National Science Foundation, a very large funder, and they were affected by the shutdown. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is shown there at about 10 o'clock, and that's a very important partner, obviously, as well. Universities and colleges has yellow font instead of red because, again, those are subcontracts. So certainly some of the subcontracts did come from NSF or USDA, but not all. And so we didn't dig in to separate those numbers more, although we have those data. And the same for other federal. That's a basket of other agencies that, when summed together, add up to that $24.9 million. The Forest Service, the Geological Service, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, for example. I want to dig into one of those awards, and in particular, I'll now pull out the slice for the Department of Energy, DOE. And I want to tell you about a project that's being done with Department of Energy support. And it involves chemistry, and I can't resist teaching when delivering a report as well. So, and I've got my Academy of Distinguished Teachers pin on, and I'll allude to that a little bit later. But let me ask, by show of hands, how many people have heard of Nobel laureate Fritz Haber? Fritz Haber. Yeah, chemical engineers need not apply. Anybody? Audience? Okay, one or two. So let me tell you a little bit about Fritz Haber. Turn of the century, the 20th century, first individual to make the deployment of chemical weapons possible, so helped the German military deploy them on the Western Front to devastating effects against Allied armies. And also facilitated the conduct of World War I, I guess I'd say. At the time, to make explosives, you needed nitrates. The source of nitrates was mostly guano, believe it or not, but large deposits in South America. And the Allies had access to these, but the Axis powers at the time were blockaded and couldn't get them. And so Haber figured out how to take nitrogen from the atmosphere, so that's N2. Every time you're taking a breath, you're getting 78% reagent-grade nitrogen. And it's a useless molecule. It does nothing to you. You just exhale it. However, he figured out how to combine it with hydrogen under very high temperature and pressure to make ammonia. And ammonia can then be turned into nitrates, and that allowed the German war machine to make explosives, and that war dragged on and killed millions of people. And I know what you're thinking at this point. You're thinking, I thought we were supposed to like Nobel laureates. So why did he win the Nobel Prize? Well, there's another really critical use for ammonia, and I told Regent Svigum I was going to quiz him, but it's kind of on the slide, and so I knew you knew anyway. It's fertilizer. So ammonia is a fertilizer. It is turned into other kinds of nitrogen-containing fertilizers because without the nitrogen in fertilizers that we put into soils all around the world, without intensive fertilization, it's estimated that about 1/3 of the world's population would starve. We could not support anywhere close to that number. So there's order 3 billion people alive now because of fertilization. So how much do we put into making ammonia? 1% of Earth's energy output goes to the Haber-Bosch process. So Bosch was a BASF chemist who industrialized it. 1%, 4% of our natural gas usage every year goes to making ammonia. So if you think about that, it's an enormous carbon footprint. We're putting a lot of CO2 into the air in the process of making that ammonia, but we need it to eat the food that keeps everybody alive. So here's this wonderful research project I want to tell you about from the University of Minnesota. That's your teaching moment. This is a collaboration between researchers in the College of Engineering, and in particular in Chemical Engineering Materials Science, as well as folks at our West Central Research and Outreach Center. And they're looking at ways at harvesting sort of local power sources, maybe renewable power sources, in this case wind power, because we've got great access to wind resources in western Minnesota. And they've discovered a catalyst that will allow them to combine the nitrogen in the air using the power they harvest from the windmill with water, not hydrogen in this case, to make ammonia. So this has fantastic potential because this could be deployed in all sorts of different places. It does not create a carbon footprint. I drove by it, and I have to tell you that my little chemist's fingertips were tingling. It was so exciting. So I'm really fascinated by this work, and I look forward to seeing it continue to go forward and potentially achieve its scale. Let's go back to statistics. I know the teaching moment was more fun. But let's look at the history of funding. I told you it was a record year, $793.1 million. This is just showing you our awards over the course of the last 10 fiscal years. And what you'll see is there's certainly some fluctuation year over year. Part of that is just that in any given year we might get one very large award, which then doesn't appear in the next year. So in some sense, a trailing average might be a more meaningful number, but I've broken it out here by fiscal year. And you can also see just in the histogram the proportion that's federal, business and industry, state and local. Maybe the one point I'll call out here that wasn't necessarily evident from the wheel graph is that the state and local contribution has gone up this last year over prior fiscal year. And so we're always happy to be able to do more with our state partners. It's important, of course, to look at those kinds of over time comparisons of ourselves against ourselves. Obviously, we also want to compare ourselves against our peers. And so here is a selection of institutions in various rankings that can be made. So probably the most important ranking that every large research institution looks at is the National Science Foundation's HERD, the Higher Education Research and Development Report. The National Science Foundation compiles expenditure data, and we all report it in the same way, and that makes the comparison meaningful. But they do lag by 1 year compared to the awards. So I'm now talking about fiscal 17 data, not fiscal 18 data. Those are the last data NSF have released. And what you see here is the total expenditures, and at the top of the list here, these are of public institutions, and I've just included some of our Big Ten partners here. So Michigan tops the list of all public institutions with about $1.5 billion in research expenditures. The evil Red Army to the east is in fourth place with just shy of 1.2. And then you see the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, because NSF does track by campus. So Duluth contributes another roughly 24 million, if I remember the number properly, to our system total. And then the remaining campuses about another 2 million after that. And then you see some of the wannabes, I'll characterize them as, that follow us a little more down the scale. So that's one measure of ranking, but dollars are not everything. They are the only thing we can spend. But if you look at reputational capital and the other things that go into the ranking of research institutions, there are other ranking systems. One of them is CMUP that's listed there. That's the Center for Measuring University Performance. And they track 9 things, including sort of spending, endowment, number of faculty in the national academies, which you heard. I'll call him Bob because he has so many titles now. Mcmaster tell you about, and I could go through all 9 if you want to afterwards. But we are one of only 8 public institutions that hit all 9 of those categories in the top 25. So that's the measure. They just look at who's in the top 25. So we're one of those 8. You see 3 more on there as well, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ohio State, and the others are rounded out by other public institutions around the country. And then finally, I'll call your attention to the academic ranking of world universities. That's done by Shanghai. They rank in various categories, and they place Minnesota Twin Cities 37th in the world. So that's all universities in the world. That includes Oxford, Cambridge, the Sorbonne, Scuola Normale, Tokyo, you name it. So 37 is not a bad place to be in that distinguished list. Within the United States, including both public and private, 25, and then finally when limited only to publics, just as NSF spending has us at 9th place. So I think those are very good numbers. We're proud of those numbers. It doesn't mean that we can't aspire to improve those numbers, but we're certainly working from a very strong base, and it's a tribute to the work that our researchers do. And it's time for another anecdote. So I've pulled out something from the Department of Education, and I want to tell you about some work that has come out of our College of Education and Human Development, and in particular, Clayton Cook is the lead investigator on 2 different projects that together total just under $3 million. And these 2 projects are focused on 2 different topics. There's 2 projects, 2 topics. One of them is looking at how to, you had an interesting conversation earlier this morning. It's wonderful the way the early part of the day can lead into the current part of the day, about how difficult it can be for top-down initiatives to be successful. And I've been a faculty member a long time, so I'm very familiar with the resistance that the faculty can put up. And you won't be surprised to hear that happens in the K-12 system as well. So if you've got some evidence-based practice that you want to implement in your school system, and you do it as a top-down initiative, you want to be sure that you have mechanisms that foster buy-in from the teachers as well. And so one of these is how to, the first of these 2 projects is how to work with teachers in the elementary school systems in order to get their buy-in and have them adopt evidence-based best practices, and in particular with respect to meeting social, emotional, and behavioral needs of their students. And that's taking place in St. Paul Public Schools, Lakeville area public schools, as well as the Princeton School District. And of course, it's a great example of how the state of Minnesota is a laboratory. It's certainly the case that what happens here in Minnesota is likely to extend to any state in the United States and globally. The second project is looking at dropout prevention strategies, and it focuses on the 9th grade. And I heard yesterday Regent Rocha mentioned the challenge of the graduation rate of underrepresented students within our university, for example, and a key point at which those students start to drop out of the education system is the 9th grade. And so targeting that population in order to foster their success so that they can then come into our system is a really important contribution. So again, I salute the workers involved, and this is also collaborative with the University of Washington, so they're working with some schools there as well. Now let's talk a little bit about technology, commercialization, and business partnership. And so I told you one of our values is discovery. And discovery is where you, as I said, pull new knowledge out of the darkness of ignorance. And the question is, what do you do with it then? So sometimes what you do is you just make it public, and it's useful to society as something that anybody can pick up and use. And sometimes the best means to make discovery have an impact on society is to pursue some sort of commercialization route, right? And because there is a profit motive that fosters further development and potentially further research as well, you can actually achieve the impact that's desirable from that new discovery. And so I want to start in focusing on technology commercialization by talking about startup activity. So startups, new businesses, if you will, are the kind of bubbling spring in the economy, right? They're the new spun out entities that are trying to take intellectual property, ideas, inventions, and make them commercially viable. And so if you look at our startup activity in the last fiscal year, 13 companies spun out from an incubator that's not far below us, about 4 floors, with the help of our technology commercialization office. 8 of those were in Minnesota, 5 were outside Minnesota, but using Minnesota inventions. And if you look at the areas where our startup companies tend to be active, that's shown in the little color wheel on the right. And it covers the scope you might expect for this institution, which covers a huge amount of research. So a lot in the biopharma area, medical devices, obviously critical to the state of Minnesota, software and other engineering discoveries, energy, and that's a critical area for sustainability, and then food and agriculture. So looking at the statistics from fiscal year 6 to 18, there's 132 of these startups. More than 75% of them are still active in one way or another. And that's a pretty good number, it turns out, in the startup community. So we're excited about that. And I want to tell you about a specific one. I'm going to tell you about a company called Core Biome. So its original funding, it's worth talking about where that came from. So it is a NIH-funded as well as state and local funded entity. And I'm just flipping through my notes here because I want to find the right one. There we go. I just want to tell you the company, darn it. There we go, the Minnesota Partnership for Biotechnology and Medical Genomics. I knew there was something I wanted to say. So that's the Translational Product Development Fund, and obviously that's been something the state has been interested in seeing bear success. And Core Biome, which is the company I want to tell you about, was initiated from the research that derived from that investment. And so what Core Biome does is it was a collaboration between researchers, a faculty member who's in our Department of Computer Science and Engineering and also has an appointment in the Biotechnology Institute, and then researchers in our Genomics Center, the Minnesota Genomics Center, which is part of my office, which has kind of a service component but also does some research. And they're interested in characterizing biomes, and in particular, one biome that's really important. You may know that you are colonized by more bacteria than there are cells of you in your body. So it's an interesting question what you means. But your health is very tightly coupled with the kinds of microbes that are in you, the relative proportions of them with their health, if you will. And so you can diagnose certain diseases and figure out certain kinds of interventions by looking at what's going on in that microbiome. However, many of those microbes are uncharacterized in the sense of nobody's ever cultured them and grown them in a petri dish. They don't like agar or whatever it might be. But you can sample their DNA by looking at, well, we won't go into what you look at from the human in order to find the DNA of those biomes, but let's just say you can get it. And by sequencing that DNA and looking at what's there and what's not there, it's possible to design therapeutics, as I said, make diagnoses. This company was launched in 2017. It was supported with Discovery Capital investment. So the university has a small venture fund. You heard from Stuart Mason, I think, yesterday. So he's one of the people who helps to run that fund. There are Discovery Capital pitches going on as we speak downstairs on the first floor with 3 startup companies that are looking for some investment. We only make those investments when private companies come in at least that level, and so far the fund has invested about $2.5 million, and it's attracted about $20 million in matching private investments. But in any case, not long after its launch, just quite recently, actually in January, OraSure, which is a Pennsylvania-based company, acquired Core Biome. We made a handy return on that Discovery Capital investment, and more may be forthcoming if that company hits milestones moving forward. So that's a success story that we hope to replicate on a regular basis. And indeed, we had 4 different startups do interesting things within this last fiscal year. Let me talk a little bit more generally about technology commercialization and a few of the other numbers that I'll hit here. This office is a key part of my office. It has signed more new licenses this year than ever, except 2015 when there was a really special event that 95 licenses came out of one discovery. The current number of revenue generating agreements, so these are licenses that are paying as we speak, is also at a record high. The number of patents issued is a record high. The number of Minnesota Innovation Partnership research agreements that was signed is a record high. So that's where a company is now paying for research and has some contractual arrangement and has agreed upfront about what it's going to do with the intellectual property. We facilitate that with those agreements. Number of companies having them is 58 at the moment, and the sponsored research is also at a record high. That's coming in part from those agreements as well as other contracts that may come. The startup companies is a tiny bit lower this year, but there's 25 sitting in the pipeline, so there's every reason to expect that's just sort of a year-over-year fluctuation. I do want to focus on one business and industry investment, since we're talking about business and industry. So what kinds of research does business and industry invest in and ask our researchers to help them with? So here's a case where researchers working with Mitsubishi Tanaba, which is a pharmaceutical a company in the pharmaceutical area, and looking at how alcohol use disorder affects people, and in particular, how alcohol affects neural patterns in the brain. So we have a wonderful Center for Magnetic Resonance Research, which is roughly there, with unparalleled capabilities, and that is what attracts business and industry to work with us, because we have those capabilities. It leverages that, as well as the really strong partnership between our College of Science and Engineering and medical school, for example, as well as other health sciences, because we need the sort of data analytics and all the engineering that goes into using functional magnetic resonance imaging effectively. So with those brain cell dynamic changes, they hope to come up with therapeutic interventions and means to evaluate their pharmacotherapies. One of the goals for my office, of course, as I said, is to facilitate research, and hence we need to be sure that we have the capacity to do the research that our partners want to do with us. So there are a number of areas where we look at infrastructure investments. I'll just mention one, which is a particularly pressing one, and that is data. So you can't swing a cat these days without hearing someone talking about data science, which means different things to different people. But the bottom line is a lot of individuals are interested in harvesting data, analyzing data, using analytics to pull trends out of data. And so the amount of data is also increasing at an amazing rate. And in fact, the U will probably double its storage capacity at the end of this year compared to 2016. So you can learn the prefixes mega, everybody knows that one, and next comes tera, sorry, giga, giga comes after mega, most have heard that, then tera, we're at peta right now. Petabytes of information that we need to find storage for. And there is a very robust University Storage Council that my office participates in, as well as the libraries and the Office of Information Technology, in order to make that happen. So we're eager to ensure that our researchers will always have the cutting edge technology. And finally, I alluded to my teaching pin. So I want to leave you with a really important point, I think, and that is research is teaching, is what the slide says. So it often disappoints me that in conversations with individuals who are not close to the institution, there's this view of our institution as kind of three pieces that are bolted together with maybe there's an interface, maybe there's not. There's research, there's teaching, there's public engagement, public service, whatever we might call it. But the truth is, of course, it is our research activity that provides to the students of the University of Minnesota a unique education they cannot get at another institution in the state. It is the faculty who are attracted here by the opportunity to do research who teach those students. And the students are in the laboratory, are in the field, are actually some of the people doing the research. So I'll mention a few numbers I pulled out, speaking of analytics. 5,500 undergraduate students last year enrolled in a course with research in the title, directed research, research topics in whatever, 5,500 students. 700 of them were paid to do research, so that's not enrolling in the course, but through our Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program. So that's a little shy of $1 million that went in the pockets of undergraduates to help pay their tuition and living costs. And of our sponsored research, so now the external awards, $750 million, $63 million is direct student support. So that's graduate students and undergraduate students. So I think that's a terrifically important number. We're providing an experience that no other place can. We're putting those students into Minnesota's workforce. You've heard the impressive statistics of how they stay in the state, and they've got a unique training that fosters Minnesota's economy. So I'm very proud of the role research plays in the teaching mission, and we can't afford to lose either. So with respect to strategic priorities, I know I'm probably running ever so slightly long. I want to leave you with our three thoughts, and I'm eager to continue to have these conversations as we continue to transition with your guidance to a strategic plan. We're engaged in enhancing research excellence, and so that means some strategic investments. My office has certain seed grants that it awards to faculty. We invest in infrastructure, and we look for places where we can have the maximum impact and leverage what the faculty and other researchers want to do. We engage closely with our partners in the colleges of the Academic Health Center, the former Academic Health Center, where there are enormous new opportunities, I would say, because of the resetting of our relationship with Fairview and its hospital system, as well as other ongoing potential alignments with other healthcare systems in the state. So that presents a lot of new opportunities to enhance research excellence, I would say. We promote and sustain research integrity. I mentioned that to you already through both compliance as well as educational functions. And finally, we want to accelerate the transfer of knowledge for the public good. I mentioned that sometimes that takes place through commercialization, although there are other means as well for us to get our research out of the university into the hands of the public and to increase the public weal. With that, I think I am done. I see the lovely M on the maroon background, and I am eager to take questions. Except I want to thank my staff who turned around this report. I think Wednesday we were told we should present on of last week on Friday. So heroic work on my staff, who I am privileged to work with, and now I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Vice President Kramer. You actually did a remarkable job of combining anecdotes, impacts, and statistics there in a very enlightening conversation. I'm gonna incur the wrath of my colleagues and not honor you with the opportunity to engage this board. We are running late, but I know you well, and I know your willingness to engage any regent on anything that came up in this, and we'll look for an opportunity to make sure we get a full board dialogue with you, but we're going to bring it to a close here without giving the board a chance to engage you. But I do have one very little anecdote of my own. Last night, after our event over at the Bell Museum, my cousin, who is a principal of an elementary school in Fairmont, Minnesota, texted me to say she was at a conference of elementary principal teachers, and Dr. Clay Cook blew her away. So how's that? And then you flash a slide up, and you and I did not coordinate that.
We make an impact every day in every way.
Pretty cool. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair McMillan.
All right. We're going to move straight then into committee rework. And Regent Anderson, you typically have the biggest volume of materials for us to work on today. So take it away.
Prepared for me?
Always.
The Finance and Operations Committee acted on 6 items this month. However, before I move those items, I do want to extend my apologies to Vice President Brown and Senior Director Horstman for delaying the annual report on workforce and total compensation. We did not take up that report because I wanted to ensure that that report had enough time for substantive discussion that the important topic requires. We anticipate the report will return to the committee at our next meeting in May. The committee did vote to recommend approval of the resolution related to the adoption of amendments to the Regents of the University of Minnesota traffic regulation ordinances. I move approval of this resolution.
That comes from a committee. It doesn't need a second. Is there discussion? Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. As you know, we had a spirited debate about 600 feet in 2 blocks yesterday, and I have one question. We were told that that was the Minneapolis policy or regulation. What is it in St. Paul, since this would govern St. Paul as well? So is it the same as St. Paul, or are we going to have a education problem with the new policy?
I think we were told it mirrored Minneapolis. I did see Vice President Bertelsen wandering back there. He may be in a position to answer, does it mirror St. Paul? Welcome.
Mr. Chair, Regent, I don't know the answer about St. Paul, but technically we're in Falcon Heights, so St. Paul wouldn't apply, and of course then I don't know Falcon Heights rules either.
Well, maybe you could look that up and...
We can find that out, yeah.
Very good. Thank you. All right, other discussion on the adoption of the regulations coming out of the Finance and Operations Committee. Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Very good. Regent Anderson.
Thank you. The committee voted to recommend approval of the resolution related to the tuition surcharge for the College of Science and Engineering Twin Cities campus. I move approval of this resolution.
Second.
All right, that's moved, and discussion on what was a very good conversation yesterday. This is the motion to adopt the tuition surcharge in the College of Science and Engineering. No further discussion. I'll ask for a vote. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, that motion carries. Regent Anderson.
Thank you. The committee voted to recommend approval of the amendment to the fiscal year 2019 annual capital improvement budget for East Cliff renovation and repair. I move approval of the capital budget amendment.
Second.
All right, that is properly before us. Discussion on the East Cliff capital budget amendment. Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Thank you. The committee voted to recommend approval of the resolution related to the proposed labor agreement with AFSCME Locals 3937 and 3801 technical employees. I move approval of this resolution.
All right, that comes from the committee. It's properly before the board. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor of adopting that recommendation? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? The AFSCME contracts are approved.
Thank you. The committee voted to recommend approval of the amendment to the fiscal year 2019 annual capital improvement budget for the Volleyball Performance Center remodel, Maturity Pavilion, Twin Cities campus. I move approval of the capital budget amendment.
Second.
Okay, that is before us. Discussion on the volleyball facility capital amendment or capital budget amendments. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's approved as well. Regent Anderson.
The committee voted to recommend approval of the consent reports, which includes the Central Reserves General Contingency, purchase of goods and services of $1 million and over, an amendment to the employment agreement for the football offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, Twin Cities campus, amendments to the civil service employment rules, a capital budget amendment for M Health clinics and surgery center leasehold improvements on the Twin Cities campus, and schematic designs. I move approval of the consent report.
All right, discussion on yesterday's consent report coming out of the Finance and Ops Committee. All right, let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. That concludes my report.
Very good. A substantial amount of activity. Regent Cohen, who opened and closed her 12 years on this board, chairing the Audit Committee. Do you have any items of information or action for us?
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I have a few items of discussion. There were 3 items for discussion. First, our partners from Deloitte provided their final summary of the fiscal year 2018 audit work. We also discussed proposed approaches for fiscal year 2019. Because the university has had clean audits in the research area for several years, Deloitte proposed and the committee agreed to move the research audit to every other year's audit cycle. Deloitte will come back to the committee in May to provide their work plan for fiscal year 2019. We also heard an update on the Twin Cities undergraduate admissions audit. I'm pleased to report that they've made significant progress on their recommendations and have only 2 outstanding recommendations remaining. They've implemented a new software platform that has addressed many of the technology-related audit findings. And in the final item, the committee received an update on internal audits performed since October. Chief Auditor Klatt reported that 41% of outstanding recommendations rated as essential were implemented, which exceeds their goal rate of 40%. 11 audit reports have been issued since October with 52 essential recommendations. Thank you, Chair McMillan. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. Regent Beeson, the Litigation Review Committee met yesterday as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Briefly, the Litigation Review Committee met, and at the meeting we adopted a resolution that authorized the closing of the meeting to discuss matters of attorney-client privilege.
That concludes your report. Very good. Regent Omari, Mission Fulfillment.
McMillan. Mission Fulfillment Committee had 1 action item this month. The committee voted to recommend approval of the revised consent report, which includes academic program additions, changes, and discontinuations, conferral of tenure for outside hires, the 2019 post-secondary planning joint report to the Minnesota Legislature, and the 2019 MnDRIVE biennial report to the Minnesota Legislature. I would move approval of the consent report.
All right, that comes to us from the Mission Fulfillment Committee. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Information items?
Sir, that concludes my report, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Very good. And that takes us to our final committee that concluded shortly before we began, the Governance and Policy Committee. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. The Governance and Policy Committee considered one action item this month. The committee voted to recommend adoption of proposed amendments to the Board of Regents policy, appointments to organizations and boards. I move adoption of the proposed amendments.
Discussion on that motion from that committee. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Any other items, Regent Rocha?
That concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you all. Thursday is and the Friday morning work that begins early are heavy lifts for the administration and for this organization and this board, and a lot of business getting moved forward here. Old business. Any items of old business to come before the board? Hearing none, I do have an item of new business for our consideration, and as Regent Rocha just referenced, this is President Kaler is going to explain this, but we just adopted amendments to the appointments to organizations and boards that call for us to make appointments to the U of M Health Clinics, the CSC, Board of Directors, and the administration would like to bring forward recommendations for our consideration today rather than waiting until we meet in March. This is not our normal course of business, of course, but I'm going to let President Kaler describe this, and then we can consider it as new business if we want to.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. As a refresher, in fall of 2018, the Board of Regents approved a new partnership amongst the University of Minnesota Medical School, University of Minnesota Physicians, and Fairview Health Services. Part of this agreement retains the Clinic and Surgery Center, CSC, as a separate joint legal venture called the University of Minnesota Health Clinics and Surgery Center, Incorporated. As stated in the joint venture agreement, the CSC retains a separate governing board which is chaired by Dean Jacob Tolar. An important step in our implementation of the ML Fairview Joint Clinic Enterprise is to repopulate the board of directors at the CSC. So in accordance with the new amendments just adopted by the Board of Regents, it's my pleasure to bring forward the following two recommendations for the CSC Board of Directors. Dr. Badre Canetti is the CEO of the University of Minnesota Physicians as well as Vice Dean for Clinical Affairs at the University of Minnesota Medical School. He's also a professor in the Department of Urology and Director of the Institute for Prostate and Urological Cancers. Pete Mitch is the CFO of the University of Minnesota Medical School and UMP. Native of St. Paul, he started his career in public accounting. He's been in the medical school for 28 years, first in the Department of Medicine and then the Dean's office. These two nominees, along with Dr. Tolar and Senior Vice President Brian Burnett, provide solid leadership for UMP and the university on this management board. I thank you for your consideration. I refer you to the docket item summary that contains slightly longer bios of the two individuals, as well as a copy of the letter from UMP nominating these individuals. And again, I recognize doing this in new business is an unusual way to do it, but we'd like to populate this board so it can continue its work without interruption, without waiting until March. And I believe these are individuals well known to many of you and should be relatively non-controversial. So, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, President Kaler, and thanks for acknowledging the procedural irregularity here. Can you give just a little further insight into why action now is critical?
Well, we would simply like to have the board at full strength so it can take on its role of oversight of CSC without delay. It's, I don't think, a matter of life and death if we have to wait a month, but it again feels to me fairly routine.
Well, I'm interested in if there's a motion to consider this.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All right. Discussion now on the review and action proposal before us from the administration. As to this Regent, this is obviously, you all know I'm not a big fan of review action. There are times when it's necessary and even appropriate. I'm this is an area where I would look to Dean Tolar and President Kaler and our leadership team to recommend the people, and I can't imagine that I would typically have, concerns personally when they've given it their best thought, but again, I want to make sure the board is comfortable with taking this action. So, Regent Omari.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm good with this as well. I'll just note that it looks like, and I'm trying to read this very quickly, like this was sent on the 31st to the President's office. So it's been over a week that we may have had a chance to look at this. That would have been nice. Thanks.
Thank you, Regent Omari. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's awkward because this is literally the moment that I've learned of this. I didn't know coming in today. When we entertained the prospect of going to action on the underlying policy, it certainly wasn't with it was with the expectation to allow us, to do this, but I, certainly had no concept that it would be happening within minutes, if not just a couple hours. And so the challenge, these two individuals, considering the positions that they already occupy, I think are fairly well vetted. And so that brings me some level of comfort. I don't love the precedent by any means. The bigger thing is typically it takes me about 3 decades to really understand concepts, let alone just a few minutes here. The understanding how many appointments we make, are these sort of presumed appointments to this particular board based on the positions that they hold? We don't really have a whole lot of background information on what the appointments are. And I have no concept of or process opportunity to analyze. If we have X number of slots, what are we seeking to do? Would these people likely be appointed by other? I just don't understand any of these dynamics, and anything that you could provide would certainly be helpful to me.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. President Kaler, are you able to provide that, or one of your team members?
I think so, Chair. McMillan, and again, I will try to do it in order to be brief rather than bringing a bunch of people up here. Are these presumptive appointments? It makes a lot of sense to have the CEO of UMP and the CFO of UMP on the board of this corporation, which manages our clinical and surgery center. So it seems to me, I'll use the word obvious appointments to make in the course of doing business. And again, I do apologize. We have a lot of moving parts, and we could have brought this to you a day or two earlier, and we didn't. So I apologize for that and for the request for review and action. But again, I feel it's quite a routine bit of business.
Can you remind us of the size of the board and how many appointments?
I believe there are 4 individuals on the board that's set forward in the
attached letter.
Paragraph 2.
Yeah, chaired by the Dean of Medical School, include 4 members from Fairview Health Services, 1 additional member appointed by the Dean, and 2 appointed by UMP physicians. So the Dean has appointed Brian Burnett as his member. These 2 are the UMP physicians, and Fairview Health Services will provide their 4.
All right, that is helpful, although, again, it's tough to move this quickly, but I do think these people make tremendous sense. Regent Anderson?
When I looked at this, again, I don't like to do things this quickly, but when I looked at this and I read paragraph 2, it appears to me that, just like what you guys said, the last sentence in there, that these 2 are appointed by UMP physicians. So UMP physicians have picked these 2 and are asking us to ratify. Is that not the case? I can't imagine that UMP physicians are going to pick 2 people who don't serve them well and serve the university well. So that would be my take on this.
Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I'm trying to reconcile some things. So does this have to do with the memo that we received yesterday or 2 days ago from the General Counsel's office about how this process should work? Okay, so so we did receive a heads up. We just didn't know that we were going to have to approve it once we approved the new policy change. I will support this today, but I think it's just a little, I I don't know what the right term is for it, but in terms of keeping us informed of kind of what's going to happen, I think this gets a 0 out of 10, and I hope it doesn't happen too frequently in the future.
I'm confident it won't. Other board comments, questions before I call for a vote? It has been moved and seconded and now discussed. All right, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, that item of new business is behind us, and I have another item of new business. We're going to take up a resolution next to conduct a non-public meeting of the board so that we can discuss in private potential real estate transactions. The open meeting law allows certain meetings to be closed, but requires before closing a meeting that the board states the specific grounds permitting the meeting to be closed and describe the subject to be discussed. I'm going to do that right now. The specific grounds here are to develop or consider offers for the purchase or sale of real property. The addresses of the property are included in the resolution, and the docket materials include some planning context for any offers the board might consider related to the purchase or sale of these properties. I'd like to note that the meeting will be audio recorded and will be made available to the public after all property discussed at the meeting has been purchased or sold, or the board has abandoned the purchase or sale or further transactions of that property. And I'm now going to ask Mr. Steves to read the resolution to close the meeting. Mr. Steves?
Whereas, based on advice of the General Counsel, the Board of Regents has balanced the purposes served by the open meeting law and determined that there is a need to review confidential or protected non-public real estate data involving the University of Minnesota. Now, therefore, be it resolved that in accordance with Minnesota Statutes 13D.01 Subdivision 3 and 13D.05 Subdivision 3C, a non-public meeting of the Board of Regents be held on Friday, February 8th, 2019 in the boardroom, 600 McNamara Alumni Center, for the purpose of developing or considering offers or counteroffers for the purchase or other transactions related to the following real property: property at approximately 2324 University Avenue Southeast, property at approximately 2218 University Avenue Southeast, property at approximately 2030 University Avenue Southeast.
All right. That resolution is before us for consideration. Is there a motion to adopt it?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on the resolution before we vote on whether to close the meeting or not. All right. This vote then is on the resolution to close the meeting, and I'll call it now. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Very good. So to our audience, other than members of the administration directly involved in this and members of the public, we thank you for your participation today and would ask you to depart, and then we'll ask our team to end the sign or the casting of it. Yep.
Everybody turn this on.